on the papers, or is that-
Also, this is report out of closed session. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor. The Emeryville City Council, the Mesa Board, and the successor agency met in closed session on the items listed on the closed session agenda. Regarding item 5.1, an update was provided. Regarding item 6.1, an update was provided. And regarding item 7.1, an update was provided. Thank you.
All right, closed session is adjourned. I'd like to open City of Emeryville as a successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency. I call this meeting to order. It is 7:18 p.m. Do we need to do a roll call? All right, let's go for it.
Councilmember Bowders.
Here.
Councilmember Donahue.
Here.
Councilmember Martinez.
Here.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Here.
And Mayor Medina.
Here. All right, can I get an approval of the final agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Motion by Vice Mayor Pats, second by Member Martinez.
Councilmember Bowders.
Yes.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Any ex parte communications to report?
I have one.
Yes.
I met with the Chief of Staff for County Board Supervisor Keith Carson to discuss the ROPS 1920 cycle.
Thank you. I discussed this with Barbara Halliday. Anything else? All right. Public comment for items not on the agenda or items on the consent agenda? All right, come on up.
Good evening.
You can bring the mic down a little bit if you want.
Okay. Good evening, council members. Thank you. I am here on behalf of the items on the agenda 6.5 and 6.6.1, 6.6.2. I'm providing comments. My name is Christine Noma. I am an attorney at the firm Wendell, Rose & Black & Dean in Oakland, California. And I'm here representing Mrs. Catherine Lennon-Lozick. The comments I have are on the resolutions seeking approval of $150,000 in funding to the Department of Toxic Substances Control and $995,000 for the services of EKI Environmental. These resolutions and payments pertain to environmental contamination and remediation at the City Corporation yard property. Mrs. Lozick's deceased husband sold the property to the redevelopment agency on or about June 2nd, 1999. Mrs. Lozick disagrees with the statements presented in the memorandum regarding the environmental issues. The city has filed a lawsuit, as many of you should know, to recover cleanup costs and for contribution against the former owners of the property, which includes Mrs. Lozick and a third party, Hansen, a British company. The memorandum appears to indicate that under CERCLA, which is the environmental federal law, the city is not liable as an owner or operator because of exclusions from liability under the law. Those exclusions are for an innocent purchaser and for property acquired involuntarily. However, Mrs. Lozick disagrees with this analysis, and it is our position that the city is strictly liable under federal environmental laws as an owner and operator. In fact, the city does not qualify for the defense of involuntary acquisition because it did not acquire the property through eminent domain, inheritance, or abandonment. Rather, the redevelopment agency purchased the property. The city is also not an innocent landowner because it purchased the property knowing that the property was contaminated not only with soil contamination but also groundwater contamination. So therefore, it's our position that under the law, the city is jointly and severally liable, along with any other responsible parties for the cost of cleanup as the current owner of the contaminated property. We also disagree with the city's contention that the contamination from the property has migrated or contributed to the contamination at an adjacent property to the west, which is known as Site B. The city did enter into a settlement agreement several years ago with Chevron and Unocal for petroleum contamination. The city is now contending that my client was responsible for solvent contamination, but in fact, that property, known as Site B, included other industrial operations, including metalworking, rust-proofing, machine shops, and Apex Manufacturing, and another company that used chlorinated solvents, which would also be the source of the contamination.
All right, your time for public comment is now up.
Oh, sorry, okay. What I do have is a letter for the city attorney and extra copies that we'd like to put into the record. Excuse me.
Great. You can hand that on over to our city attorney.
I will do that, thank you.
Thank you. Do I have a motion for consent?
So moved. Second.
All right, so moved by Member Bowders, seconded by Member Donahue.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right, this takes us to action items. 7.1. Resolution of the City of Emeryville, recognize obligation payment schedule for the period of July 1st, 2019 through July 30th, 2020, a ROP cycle.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the successor agency. Michael Guina, the City Attorney, and I'll be presenting the presentation on the ROPS. So an outline for tonight's presentation. I'll give you a brief background on the ROPS process, the approval process, and then I'll go into the ROPS 1920 enforceable obligations. By way of background, the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency was dissolved as a matter of law on February 1st, 2012. The successors agency is now responsible for preparing a recognized obligation payment schedule, or ROPS, for an annual period beginning July 1 through June 30th. The ROPS describes payments required for enforceable obligations of the former agency. In terms of the approval process and calendar, tonight the successor agency will consider and hopefully approve the ROPS before you. After that, it will be forwarded to the Oversight Board for their approval, for their consideration next week, January 23rd, and then submitted to the Department of Finance by February 1st. One note about the Oversight Board. Until last year, Oversight Board functions were carried out by the local Oversight Board of the city, and pursuant to dissolution law, in June 30th of last year, beginning July 1 last year, the local oversight boards were dissolved, and those oversight board functions were transferred to the county level. So this year will be the first year that the county oversight board will act in that capacity. Once the ROPS has been submitted to the DOF, they have until April 15th to make an initial determination of the enforceable amounts requested on the ROPS. Note that the DOF has the authority to eliminate or modify any item. If they accept the ROPS as presented, then the process is done. If, however, they have modified or eliminated any item, then the successor agency has the authority to request a meet and confer. That meet and confer must be submitted within 5 business days after receiving notice of the DOF's determination. Given the short time frame, the resolution before you adopting the ROPS also gives staff the authority to issue or to submit a meet and confer request should the DOF deny any or all of our ROPS application. If the meet and confer process has occurred, the outside date for the DOF to make a determination is May 17th. Before I go into the ROPS 1920, I wanted to just take a brief moment to note items that were retired off the ROPS 1819. The first one is 3706 San Pablo Avenue. The obligation of the former agency here was to prepare and document a vapor mitigation plan in accordance with the requirements of the oversight of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. That project is nearing completion. The developer will be responsible for documenting that the vapor management plan has been installed and obtaining Regional Quality Control Board sign-off. And so this item will no longer appear on the 1920 ROPS. This next item is the Amtrak station. This is the subject of 2 agreements between the developer and the former agency, and then the agency and Amtrak, to eventually transfer the property over from the developer through the former agency to Amtrak. The obligations under these agreements will take place in this 1819 cycle, and so they will not show up as future obligations in the 1920 cycle. So moving on to ROPS 1920, the enforceable obligations of the successor agency or the former agency fall into 3 main buckets. 1 is the administrative costs, 2 is debt service, and 3 is hazmat remediation and monitoring obligations of the former agency. I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking about the 3rd bucket. Staff is available if you have any questions on the other 2. So turning to hazmat remediation and monitoring, this also falls into 3 buckets: South Bayfront Site A, Site B, and the Corp Yard. So starting with Site A, the former agency's obligation was monitoring and remediation of surface water, soils, and groundwater, and reporting out to the oversight agency of DTSC. And so the ROPS items here associated with Site A are implementing the management and monitoring program and responding to DTSC oversight. These are the items that are listed on the ROPS associated with Site A. The Sherwin-Williams Settlement Agreement and Order is the enforceable obligation, which requires the agency or the successor agency to monitor and report to DTSC groundwater contamination and implement the approved cleanup plan. The same thing for the Site A disposition and development agreement. To that end, the contract with EKI, line 44, provides the professional services needed for that monitoring and reporting to DTSC. Line 45, the DTSC item, is the cost of reimbursing DTSC for their oversight cost for the project. Turning to Site B, in a similar fashion, the former agency's obligation is monitoring and reporting to DTSC contaminants relating to groundwater, surface water, and soils. And similarly, the ROPS items relate to monitoring and remediation, regulatory oversight, as well as legal services, and I'll go through all 3. Before I do that, let me just forecast or look back at what the successor agency did in the 1819 period, and then what we're going to forecast for the 1920 period. So during the 1819 period, the successor agency conducted additional monitoring in the shallow and deep groundwater zones. What we are hoping to do in the 1920 period is finalize a completion report and the necessary operations and maintenance plan, and have that approved by DTSC. We will also likely need to enter into a land use covenant with DTSC to impose restrictions on the use of groundwater on the site. These are the items here that are on the ROPS associated with Site B. The Chevron settlement agreement and order is the enforceable obligation of the former agency, wherein the agency is responsible for soil and groundwater remediation on the site and from any off-site sources, which will be important when we talk about the Corp Yard. The EKI item is for professional services related to the monitoring of those site conditions and conducting the necessary remediation. EKI during this 1920 period is expected to develop the O&M plan, and as well as a completion report for DTSC's approval. Cox Castle is a law firm. We will require their legal services to help us prepare and negotiate the O&M agreement, as well as the land use covenant with DTSC. They will also assist in preparing the documents that are necessary for transferring the site from the successor agency to the city in accordance with the long-range property management plan. There's also an item for DTSC to provide oversight for the site similar to Site A. And then there's also an item regarding environmental insurance. So the insurance policy on the site had expired, and we are currently seeking to renew that. The environmental insurance policy is for a new 10-year term with a $10 million limit that will cover known and unknown contaminants both during remediation and after site closure. Turning to the Corp Yard. By way of background, this item was purchased, or this property was purchased by the agency in July of '99 and sold to the city in 2009. One of the terms of the purchase and sale agreement is that the agency is obligated to defend the city against any claims relating to hazardous materials coming from the site. As a result of the long-term monitoring and investigation of both sites A and B, the agency has developed a good body of evidence that indicates that contaminants are flowing onto sites A and B, and that the source of that is the Corp Yard. Therefore, that comes into play in relation to the enforceable obligations of both sites A and B. Remember that as for Site B, the Chevron agreement requires that the agency be responsible for any contaminants that are on the site at the time and any contaminants that flow onto the site from any off-site sources. In a similar fashion, as for Site A, the Site A DDA and the settlement agreement with Sherwin-Williams also impose a similar obligation on the agency regarding contaminants that come onto that site from off-site sources. To that end, the remediation of the Corp Yard involves the retention of EKI for professional services associated with the cleanup of the site. The EKI contract for $2.9 million is implementation, represents implementation of the approved remedy for that site during the 1920 period. We anticipate finalizing the remedial action plan and preparing and finalizing the CEQA documents necessary to carry that out. EKI will then also go forward with demolition of the existing building on the site and preparing the site for shallow soils excavation. They will then install and calibrate the two types of treatment, the multi-phase extraction treatment and then the thermal treatment, which we've discussed here before. And then they'll also conduct well abandonment for monitoring wells that are no longer necessary after we are into the implementation phase. Other items on the ROPS related to the Corp Yard, again, environmental oversight from DTSC, and then other legal services from Cox Castle related to the Corp Yard. The successor agency, at the same time that the successor agency is conducting its investigation and remediation of the site, we are also involved in litigation with historic owners of the site, which we believe are responsible, partly responsible, or have various stages, various aspects of responsibility in relation to the historic contamination of the site. And so the costs here for Cox Castle's legal services relate to that litigation. We anticipate that we may be set for trial during the ROPS 1920 period, and so the costs here reflect that development as well. So those were the three areas that the successor agency is conducting its environmental remediation on. The summary page here shows the total amount of obligations that are requested for the current 1920 period. It also summarizes, again, the key dates. And the staff recommendation is that you consider this report, you take any public testimony, and then you adopt the accompanying resolution adopting the admin budget and the ROPS for the 1920 period. I'm available for any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Right, any clarifying questions? All right, any public comment on this item?
I guess I can finish my comments. And, Christine Noma on behalf of one of the defendants in the litigation, Mrs. Catherine Lennon Lozick. What I wanted to add with regard to Site B was not only is there contamination from Site B, which has not been investigated as being a source, and that also there is a separation of a whole set of railroad tracks as well as other land area between Mrs. Lozick's former property as well as Site B. In addition, our consultant is concerned that some of the groundwater contamination was a result of activities conducted by the city's consultant, EKI, back in 2012 to 2015 when EKI constructed groundwater wells on the property. These groundwater wells drilled through a sand and gravel area, and in doing so created what's basically known as a conduit by which any contamination that up to that point in time was isolated on the property, the Lozick property, which is now the corporate yard, and has then been able to travel and migrate over to Site B. So it's our position that that is a potential liability of the city and their responsibility. In addition, with respect to the cost for EKI, what EKI is proposing to do is selecting the most expensive remedial fix. Our consultants have taken a look at EKI's proposed alternative for cleanup and believes that the cost of cleanup that is about double, almost as much as double of what it should be. And in view of the fact that the city may have liability as well, it's our recommendation and our belief that the City Council should take a serious look at the recommendations of EKI to determine whether or not, in fact, that Cadillac fix or the Mercedes-Benz fix is in fact necessary. Finally, with respect to the demolition of the building, that is $1 million cost out of that $2.995 million, and it is our position that that is a cost of development, that it's not necessary for remediation, and therefore should not be approved as part of the remediation that is being proposed by EKI. So basically, our request is that the building not be destroyed at this time, and that until the building can be inspected and tested for contamination. That's basically, I conclude, and we're asking that the City Council please review in further detail and take into additional consideration the remediation proposals. In light of the fact that the remediation proposals, as I understand it, were developed when the city was involved in voluntary cleanup. Thank you.
Any other public comment? All right, do I have any council discussion or a motion?
Move.
Second.
All right, moved by Member Bowders, seconded by Member Martinez.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Passes. All right, so I adjourn the successor agency meeting. Sorry, guys. Next up, I call to order this meeting of the City Council on Tuesday, January 15th at 7:41 p.m. Don't think we need to do another roll call. We are all still present. For the approval of the final agenda, I suggest that we move item 11.3 in front of 11.1 and kick off the public hearings with that. If someone is all right with that, I'd like to entertain a motion to that effect.
So moved. I'll second.
All right, moved by Vice Mayor Pats, seconded by Member Bowders.
And is this to approve the agenda with no other changes?
With no other changes besides that, correct?
Correct.
Great.
All right. Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right, there are no special orders today. It is an ordinary day. Announcement of commission or committee vacancies.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I will announce that at your next regular meeting, which is on February 5th, you will look at amendments to the membership composition and schedule of the Housing Committee, and also the amending potentially the regular meeting schedule for the Public Works and Transportation Committees. Then at our meetings in March, we will have the annual Community Advisory Committee reports on their goals and accomplishments. 4 committees will report on March 5th, and the remaining 3 will report on March 19th. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Council member special announcements or reports on meetings attended. Anyone do anything fun?
So I serve on Stop Waste, and we went through our priorities recently, and one thing that we're going to approach as an agency is to start talking about meal kit delivery packaging at the state level. So we might be looking for legislative or other types of solutions. So if anyone, if anyone receives any meal kits here, would like to give me feedback on what we should be
Do and will.
asking these companies to do, yeah. Please send that feedback my way.
Member Batters and I went to Libby Schaff's inaugural party and MC Hammer was there. I feel like that was worthy of an announcement. Wasn't wearing the pants. I know you're all asking.
I feel you're landing hard on the fun piece, and I don't bring fun.
Oh no. Never.
So I attended the Alameda County Housing Authority meeting this month, and it's kind of an interesting to go to a meeting of a federal agency during the federal shutdown. But as we're looking at our year, one of the things is the troubling trend for the Housing Authority is they're losing vouchers. We have a long waiting list, and nobody's getting off the waiting list, and as rents go up, it puts pressure to cover the costs for people that are on vouchers, and so in its infinite wisdom, the federal government takes vouchers away to cover those costs as people transition out of housing assistance. So we're down in, 2 short years, 12 vouchers, which is about 10%. And that, 12 doesn't sound like a lot, but that's 12 families that are trying to find housing that we could house immediately. I have some more data to report, but unfortunately, it had to go to the feds to come back, and so I will be bringing that to our next meeting. So.
Thank you. All right. City manager report.
No report, Mayor. Thank you.
Okay. Ex parte communications. Yes.
I met some weeks ago with Elizabeth Jewell and Darren Chan representing AT&T, just talking generally about small cell towers.
Okay. Anybody else?
On item 11.3, I have received, I think as we all have, communications from Verizon and AT&T. And item 12.3, I've had meetings with representatives of MedMen, BPG, and East Bay Therapeutics.
I received the same communications about item 11.3.
Same communications.
Same.
Yep. All right. Public comment for consent agenda items. or items not on the agenda? All right, seeing none, do I have a motion for consent?
I have a request, Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I'd like to pull item
10.6.
10.6 from the consent calendar, please. With that, I'll make a motion to approve the other items if there's no other requests to remove.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion for all consent items except for 10.6 from Member Bowders and a second from Member Martinez. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right. That is done. Now let's hear 10.6.
So, if I may, Madam Mayor?
Yes, you may.
To spare our time, what I'd like to ask members to consider, this is a request for consideration of a red zone curb across from 4045 Horton Street. And unless members wish to receive a presentation, my request this evening is to continue this matter to February with the goal of asking staff to provide further information about several alternatives that may exist or have questions answered. If staff, I know I've discussed it with staff, if staff's prepared to answer all those questions this evening, we can do that, but if they would like time to respond to that and come back in February, we can do that as well. I've spoken to staff, so I just want to give them the opportunity to decide what they would like to do.
So, Madam Mayor, one way to proceed would be for Mr. Bowders to lay out his questions this evening. We can see which ones we can address, and if we can't address all of them, then we can come back at a future date, if that would be acceptable.
Okay. Andrew, would you prefer to try to go through the questions one by one and knock them out, or do you want to just come back in February?
It's up to you, Andrew.
I can handle it either way you would like.
Sorry.
We could be more informal. We could do it at the committee meeting, or I don't know what your questions are in their entirety, so I'm not sure I could answer them all. But
Actually,
probably
since we have a standing item for curb requests on committee meeting, maybe it would be more expedient if we went in depth on it then, but would that be a Brown Act conflict since I've already discussed this at committee prior with Member Donahue?
Could I just suggest that maybe Mr. Bowders articulates his questions, we get them on the record, and then to the extent staff can address them tonight, we'll do that. And if we can't, then we'll just carry it over to February.
Sure.
Great. So I just want to have a discussion with staff that includes whether or not the committee has evaluated the following items: the possibility of putting a yellow curb along the west side of Horton Street between 40th and the garage in question. Question about removing all of parking along both sides of 40th Street between Park Avenue and 40th Street. The enforcement of red zone areas in this area and whether or not people will be ultimately ticketed for parking in the zone that's being created or proposed. The potential conflict of movement between trucks and bikes in a perpendicular fashion along this, which is a bike boulevard. Further information as to whether or not the owner of the property seeking the red curb can accurately and successfully access the property with the trucks that he's seeking to use. I'd like legal to answer a question related to whether or not creating a red zone here for this type of request forfeits or otherwise limits the city's right to remove this in the future. And are we creating a right that if transferred by the building owner to a bona fide taker in good faith, will that person retain the right to the red curb, or does that somehow limit us if they purchase the building with the understanding the red curb would exist? And just confirmation, this is a completely discretionary act and it's not an act of necessity, and there's no taking from the owner if we do not provide the red curb. Those are the questions I'd like answered.
Just a couple.
A few.
Well, I could certainly answer a number of them as far as the safety issues and what we evaluate, but a number of the legal questions, no, I can't answer those right now. We'd have to do that. As far as the level of enforcement, no, we can talk about the parking occupancy, we can talk about the options we consider, we can talk about the vertical movements, we can talk about the size of the vehicles that we were told would be using. There is a loading dock that trucks can back up into that's difficult to make, and they can make that maneuver now. It's legal for them to do so, and the movements across the street and making the turns and backing up into the loading dock. What the extra space would allow is that movement could happen more quickly, would be out of the right-of-way more quickly, and would be a safer maneuver is what we determined. We can talk about the other options we looked at as well, but I can't, Ms. City Manager, certainly I can't answer all of the questions that were listed here, so perhaps we should go to committee.
All right.
I'll make a motion to continue this item and allow the Transportation and Public Works Committee to further evaluate the questions been posed.
Second.
All right. So moved by Member Bowders, seconded by Member Martinez. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you,
Roll
Andrew.
call.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Thank you.
Okay, public hearings. So we are going to start with item 11.3. And hold on, let me just get my notes. All right, I'd like to open this public hearing for item 11.3 at 7:51 PM. And I will now take some staff report on this item. Testimony. Are we ready for it?
Good evening, Mayor Medina and council members. I'm Meera Desai, Senior Planner. This is an amendment to the Telecommunications Facilities Regulations, and it's a joint effort between planning and city attorney staff members. The reason for the changes to the ordinance is that both federal and state law govern how a city may regulate a wireless communication facility. Under federal law, both states and local governments are preempted from prohibiting these facilities. The Act, however, allows some authority over placement, construction, modifications to these facilities subject to certain constraints. This has enabled cities to regulate by adopting ordinances that regulate use and design and charge fees for access to the public right-of-way use. The industry has sought to curtail a local government discretion and has had some success with FCC. On September 26th of last year, FCC issued a ruling that impacts a city's ability to regulate in the following ways. One, it limits authority to impose local design standards. Standards now must be reasonable, no more burdensome than those applied to other infrastructure, and must be published in advance. It shortens the shot clock. Currently, it's 90. The cities have 90 to 150 days to take action. That has been shortened to 60 days. So this covers the planning time from the planning approvals as well as the building permit issuance, and the clock starts from the day the application is submitted. The ruling became effective yesterday. So in the light of the ruling, staff is recommending several modifications to the planning regulations. And because these are changes to the planning regulations, these were considered by the Planning Commission last month. And the Commission's recommendation was that the Council approve all the amendments, and the action was unanimous. So the changes that are going to be made are to Chapter 5 of Title 9, which pertains to the telecommunications ordinance, and changes to the use table in the planning regulations, which requires small cell antenna facilities to get a major use permit and design review from the Planning Commission. So what will the proposed changes do? The changes will allow approval of facilities through a process similar to the accessory dwelling units, which are the the mother-in-law units. This is necessary because the application deadline for the Planning Commission meetings is 52 days prior to the meeting, making it impossible for the city to process all the necessary permits within the 60-day shot clock. The ruling states that the approvals must be based on reasonable objective standards. This means that if the standards are met, the application is approved. If not, the application is denied, and the applicant is advised as to how the project could be brought into compliance. To make the city's regulations fully consistent with the ruling, the following amendments are being made. Like I just mentioned, the use table in the planning regulations has to be modified to make the wireless communications facilities permitted in those zoning districts where they had previously been conditionally permitted. Transmission towers would continue to be prohibited in all zones except the light industrial, the heavy industrial, and public zones. The new approval procedure the existing approval procedure has been replaced with a zoning compliance review language, which is similar to that for accessory dwelling units. A waiver of regulations procedure has been included in case the applicant contends that the denial of the application would violate federal or other applicable law. If approved by the director, any such waiver would be granted only on a case-by-case basis and would be narrowly tailored to minimize deviation from city requirements. A provision allowing for a third-party technical study to resolve disputes about good faith efforts for co-location has been deleted. A requirement has been added for the applicant to provide evidence to establish that the wireless telecommunication facility is necessary to fill a gap in coverage. A requirement has been added for the application to furnish evidence of the property owner's permission to install, construct, maintain the proposed facility. So, for example, if they're doing it in the public right-of-way, an encroachment permit would be needed. A requirement has been added that the overhead components of the facility be installed on existing utility poles, if available, to preclude the installation of new poles. Another requirement has been added that the overhead components of the facility must match the color of the pole or other structure to which they're attached, so that they don't pop out. A provision has been added authorizing a community development director to adopt regulations to implement the development requirements and standards set forth in the article, and that the wireless communications facilities must comply with these additional regulations at all times. Another provision requiring a cash or a surety bond to cover costs of removal in the event that the facility is abandoned has been changed from a condition of approval to a submittal requirement prior to the issuance of a building permit. This is to ensure that we don't have equipment on poles which are no longer being used. The provision for appeal process that will be within the short clock time frame has been included. So those are, in summary, the changes that the ordinance in your packet includes. In terms of environmental review, we believe that this is exempt because these amendments do not involve a change in zoning districts where these facilities are permitted, nor do they modify standards for their approval. In terms of findings that the council has to make your basic standard findings, and we believe that these findings can be made. The general plan, for example, does not contain any provisions related to the wireless facilities. Second, this is being done in order for the city to be in compliance with the FCC ruling, which went into effect yesterday. And there is no change in areas where facilities will be permitted, and there is really no significant change in any standards. So the actions being asked of you today are the following. One is an urgency ordinance. Why an urgency ordinance? Because the FCC ruling went into effect yesterday, and a regular ordinance requires 2 readings and to take effect 30 days after the final passage. So if you only did a regular ordinance, then this would go into effect on March 7th. However, as the ruling is already in effect, we are recommending that the council adopt an urgency ordinance which would go into effect immediately and make the finding that it is in the interest of public peace, health, and safety to adopt this urgency ordinance. So like I mentioned, in addition to the urgency ordinance, you will also be adopting the regular ordinance, which will go into effect on March 7th. And there is also a resolution to your action, and this concerns the fee. The current fee is $2,500. This needs to be changed to be in compliance with the ruling, which will be $270. So that concludes my presentation. I would like to point out that we received 2 letters, 2 comment letters, one today and one a few days ago. Staff prepared a memo a couple of days ago and then revised that to add a few other changes to respond to the letter received today. If there are any questions regarding the memo which you received, the city attorney's office would be happy to answer.
Nice post.
If there is any other question, I'll be happy to try and respond, or you can ask to the city attorney.
Okay, come on up.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the council. I just wanted to clarify for the record the various late correspondence you've received. When the item published on January 4th, there was late correspondence from Verizon Wireless. They also submitted another comment today at approximately 3 o'clock, reattaching that January 4th letter and then adding other comments in an email. All that should have been transmitted to the council and is available for the public for review. In addition, we received a comment letter from AT&T at some point, I can't remember when, but before today. And in response to those letters, staff has prepared actually 2 different memos to you recommending additional changes to the ordinance. The first came from Miru Desai a couple days ago, and then there's another correspondence that came late this afternoon from the city attorney's office, which actually incorporated Miru's comment, so you can just have one document to look at, and it's responding to.
So we're all on the same page.
Yes, that one right there. In response to the comments raised by Verizon and AT&T, to the extent that we haven't explicitly addressed their comments, we believe that the director's ability to promulgate regulations under the proposed ordinance will allow the city to clarify any outstanding issues, and that also the director does have the ability, because this is a changing area of the law, waive anything that might be preempted by federal or state law. The purpose of these regulations are really designed to help the city address a area that is in flux right now. So if there's any further questions, we also have outside counsel here.
Okay. Before we take a public comment, are there any clarifying questions?
No.
All right, let's go ahead. I have a speaker card here. That doesn't mean you can't speak if you haven't given me one, but the first person who will speak is Paul Gimmelberg of Verizon Wireless.
Dear council members, my name is Paul Gimmelberg. I'm an employee of Verizon Wireless, and I'm here because the telecommunications code and proposed amendments that were heard this evening contradict a recent FCC order addressing small cell facilities. Subjective design standards are at odds with the FCC order, which requires objective evaluation of small cells. Notably, the amendments do not mention small cells at all. Typically deployed in the right-of-way, small cells are the subject of the order, which became effective yesterday, with the FCC requiring cities to develop an aesthetic criteria for small cells by mid-April. As we explain in our letter to the city, aesthetic criteria must be reasonable, non-discriminatory, and objective. Restrictions on new poles contradict state law. For new poles in the right-of-way, the required alternatives analysis must be narrowed in scope. Because Section 7901 grants telephone corporations the right to use the right-of-way, they cannot be required to evaluate private property alternatives nor provide photo simulations from private property views, including residential properties. Due to the small coverage footprint of typical small cells, applicants will be required only to show infeasibility of existing infrastructure within 200 feet along the subject right-of-way. Additionally, right-of-way facilities, including small cells, are rarely co-located due to limited pole space and structural capacity, and strict co-location requirements should not apply to the right-of-way. The proposed code limits heights of new poles to zone height limits, or potentially less if an existing support structure falls below the height limit. This contradicts the height allowance included in the FCC's definition of small cell, which is no less than 50 feet. Limiting antenna height reduces coverage footprints and could lead to the unintended consequence of more facilities required to serve an area. Additionally, the city cannot require demonstration of need for right-of-way facilities in small cells. The requirement to demonstrate a significant gap in coverage contradicts both the order and state law. While the code includes few design standards, several are subjective and will not comply with the FCC's requirement to provide objective criteria. There's no reason to require undergrounding of pole-mounted components. Wireless carriers develop small cells to provide needed service with minimal visual impact. Small equipment boxes on poles are not out of character among typical infrastructure in the right-of-way, including wood utility poles. The FCC definition of small cell contemplates up to 28 cubic feet of wireless equipment associated with the structure without limiting its location. The FCC determined that undergrounding requirements similar to aesthetic requirements must be reasonable, non-discriminatory, and objective. We urge the city to clarify that small cells may include pole-mounted equipment in addition to antennas. In conclusion, the proposed amendments should be revised to bring the code into compliance with state and federal law, particularly with respect to right-of-way facilities and small cells. The requirement to demonstrate a significant gap in coverage must be eliminated. We urge the council to delay introduction of the proposed amendments and direct staff to work with industry on needed revisions. Thank you.
Okay. Other public comment?
Good evening, Matt Yurgovich for AT&T Mobility. First of all, I want to thank you all and staff for updating the regulations around small cells. We're grateful for the effort and the time involved. However, we respectfully urge the city not to act on these items today so that we can continue to make this ordinance and make the regulations the best that they can be. There's some history to this. As was mentioned, the FCC issued an order in September that was implemented yesterday. However, in response to a request for a stay of that order on December 10th, the FCC clarified that the permitting portions, so the shot clock and the aesthetic regulations, would not go into effect until April 15th. So that means there's really no reason to act urgently on this. It seems that some of the provisions have been somewhat hastily created to meet the deadline, yesterday's deadline. Although again, nothing needs to be in place till April 15th. Even it seems that some updates were done as late as, I guess, in response to a 3 p.m. email today from Verizon. So that seems very hasty. So let's take the time to make the regulations the best that they can be, and we're happy to continue to work with the city to do so. Thank you.
Any other public comment on this item? All right. Let's get to discussion.
Close the public hearing.
Oh, let me close this public hearing at 8:08. All right. Discussion on this item and possible motions.
I just wanted to clarify with our outside counsel is that correct that the shot clock is not changed until April 15th?
Good evening. My name is Gail Karish, and I am a telecommunications attorney and your special counsel in this matter, and no, that's not correct. The only portion of the order, and I was trying to find the paragraph here, and I will cite to it when I find it, the only portion of the order that is deferred until April 15th is the portion with respect to establishing aesthetic standards. The shot clock went into effect yesterday.
Thank you. That was my understanding.
Any other questions or concerns? Do we have a motion for an urgency ordinance?
Madam Mayor, would you like to take these all separately, or how would you?
I believe we need to take them separately. Okay. All right, so let's start off. Do we have a motion for an urgency ordinance?
I'll move the urgency ordinance.
I'll second that. And is this to read by title only?
Oh, yes.
Move to read by title only.
We have a motion to read by title only from Member Martinez and a second from Member Donahue.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Thank you. An urgency ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending Article 17 of Chapter 5 of the Planning Regulations and other associated provisions of the planning regulations to make approvals of wireless communications facilities subject to the zoning compliance review process.
Thank you. Do we have a motion for the ordinance to read by title only?
No, we just did that.
No, that was the urgency
First
ordinance.
reading.
Now we're on to the regular
We
ordinance.
have to approve the ordinance.
Oh, so
Make a motion to approve the urgency ordinance.
Second.
Mayor Medina?
Yep.
Over here, just to clarify, that is with the amendments contained in the staff memo that was on the
But my
dais.
motion is to contain the staff amendments to include the words "or state."
Yep.
Thank you.
And I accept that.
Councilmember Bowders.
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue.
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats.
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Would we like to discuss or make a motion for the regular ordinance?
I'll move to read by title only.
Second.
All right, we've got a motion to read by title only by Member Bowders and a second by Member Martinez.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye.
Thank you. An ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending Article 17 of Chapter 5 of the Planning Regulations and other associated provisions of the planning regulations to make approvals of wireless communications facilities subject to the zoning compliance review process.
All right, do we have a motion for the next one?
Move the resolution.
I'll make a motion to approve the ordinance.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do we have a second for
I'll
that?
second that.
All right. We have a motion by Member Bowders and a second by Member Martinez.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right, we're on to 11.3.3, the resolution.
Now I'll move the resolution.
Now you've got a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you. We've got a motion by Member Martinez. We've got a second by Vice Mayor Pats for the resolution.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All done with this item. All right, this hearing is closed. We will go back now to 11.1.
Madam Mayor, if it pleases the council, I'd like to request that we waive presentation.
All right, I'm okay with that. Is everyone all right with waiving presentation for item 11.1?
Yes.
All right, then let's open this public hearing and go directly to public comment for item 11.1. That's the cabaret license for the public market. It's open at 8:12. Any public comment for this item? All right, seeing none, I close the public hearing and we can move on to discussion.
Move the resolution.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion by Member Martinez. We've got a second by Vice Mayor Pats.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Okay, item 11.2. Resolution of the City of Emeryville granting a one-year extension for the approval of conditional use permit and design review permit for the Doyle Street Muse. Do we have a staff report? Staff's coming on up.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. So as you said, this is for a one-year permanent extension for the Doyle Street Muse project. So for project history, this application for this project was originally submitted on March 4th, 2016. It's to demolish existing residential units and replace them with 6 larger family-friendly residential units. This project went to Planning Commission 3 times for study sessions and to City Council 2 times for study sessions, and was eventually recommended by Planning Commission for approval unanimously with 1 member absent, and then approved by City Council on November 7th, 2017. Unanimously by City Council. So the permit extension regulations state that unless the approval body states otherwise, all planning permits automatically expire after 1 year if there's no building permit and fees pulled. And an applicant may request time extensions not exceeding 1 year by applying to the original approval body, which is City Council in this case. The permit extension request was filed before the expiration, and how that's going down is November 2018, the Doyle Street Muse was approved. In May 2018, the properties were sold by the people who owned the property at the time of the permit approval to a new property owner. And since the purchase, the new property owner has completed a property survey, has hired an arborist and architect, and is working to submit the building plans. Was not able to get them submitted within the 6 months time period for that 1 year expiration. So the property owner has requested the permit extension because they've had less than 1 year since purchasing the property to get through the process of doing the building permits and everything. And they anticipate submitting building plans for review early this year. So as a reminder, this is where the property is located, just south of 59th Street on Doyle Street. And this is what the existing property looks like. And what was approved is this development right here. So it's 2 buildings with 3 units on each side, the driveway down the middle, and bike parking and common area in the back. For the findings, the permit holder has clearly documented that it has made a good faith effort to commence work upon the use. And it's in the best interest of the city to extend the permit. The project includes the construction of family-friendly housing. The project took more than 1.5 years to approve. It was approved unanimously after multiple study sessions. And there have been no substantial changes to the project. And there's no changes in the circumstances as well. So staff recommends City Council adopt the resolution approving a 1-year permit extension, and that would provide a new expiration date of November 7th, 2019 for the Doyle Street Muse project. The applicant is here and would like to address the council tonight.
All right. Come on down.
Hello, my name is Dan Singh. I purchased the property, as Navarre said, about 6 months ago. And I wanted to be available to answer any questions if the council had. We're just asking for a slight extension so that we can complete the project, or at least start the project. And that's it.
Any clarifying questions at this time? All right, then we'll go ahead and open this public hearing at 8:17 p.m. Any public comment on this item? Mr. Garpio.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is André Carpio, and I'm concerned about this project because there is a word that strikes me emotionally, which is demolition. And there is nothing that says in a demolition that there is going to be recycling of any material. I know you cannot recycle rusty nail and screws and things like that, but older buildings have real good lumbers, old-fashioned 3x6, not 4.5 by 4.5 by 5. So these 2 buildings, I'm sure, I mean, it's say dilapidated, but I mean, if it's plaster that's falling off and roof leaking and which lose the plate and this kind of thing, I mean, maybe dilapidation is exaggerated. I'm not questioning the validity of the observation. What I'm saying is that I see that there is going to be property that are going to be demolished and everything is going to be junk, trash. And lots of people just cannot afford the new stuff, or they don't have, if they can afford the new stuff, if they want to rehabilitate, the only way to get the lumbers to the old dimension is from existing building that were built in about that time. And by cutting the ends, then we can have a fresh area to put nail and brace and whatnot. And also all lumbers, from what my experience I've seen, I bought 30 of them for my house. They have no nut. They have no nut on the bottom. So the bottom tension layer is stay forever rigid without deformation. The new lumber, after several years, they caved in. And then you have to reinforce, so you have to change or put steel brace. You know, I mean, I really think that maybe the owner should be given an extension and that review if the demolition is really, really necessary. There is so many people homeless here, me included, that would move right in as is. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garpio.
Thank you. Any other public comments? All right, seeing none, the public hearing is closed. And let's move on to discussion or a motion for 11.2. Any discussion?
I'll move the item.
All right, moved by Vice Mayor Pats. Second. Second by Member Martinez.
Councilmember Bouders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right. You're on to 12.1, the South Bayfront Pedestrian Bridge and Horton Landing Park.
Good evening, Mayor Medina and members of council. Andrew Clow, your Public Works Director. And we're here to talk about the South Bayfront Pedestrian Bicycle Bridge. I also have with me this evening Todd Teachout, our project manager, and definitely would like to acknowledge Michael Gina and our whole legal team in the work that they put together in trying to get this agreement with the railroad together. The South Bayfront Bridge, I can talk about as much of the bridge as you would like in the project, but quickly, the focus that I wanted to talk about here was the easement areas and the agreement with the railroad, because what we'll be asking for tonight is that you approve the railroad agreement as well as authorize us to move forward with the bidding. Give me a big picture? Sure. And I can explain the easements and wanted to make this clear to everybody because it's a little confusing perhaps in the report. But the negotiations with the railroad, we of course wanted to get as much time as we could possibly get to work across the railroad tracks, and the railroad wanted to minimize that as much as they possibly could. So what we have are easement areas that we've worked out with the railroad both to the west and the east of the tracks, and those are marked as areas A and C. And we have those construction areas for 18 months. And that period of 18 months commences 6 months after we sign the agreement. Those areas we'll need because anywhere when we're working adjacent to the tracks and near the tracks, they're very concerned about that, but we have permission basically to work in those areas. I don't know how much more to say about that. Then the other area, Area B, which you'll see in the green, it mentions 48 hours up there. What we have is we have a 2-week, there's a 2-week window within that light green area. And those are it's one of the widest point of tracks in the area here. There's the main line tracks running in and out of the Port of Oakland. And then there's a whole series of siding tracks as well. That green, that light green, covers an area where there's the siding. And what we'll be doing is putting together the main bridge structure, assembling that on the city property, and then building the stairwells, the ramps, and the towers that the bridge will attach to. And then we have a 2-week window where we can work within that light green area, but we may not stop train traffic. So in other words, we cannot, we have to have flagmen out there. We can work in the area, but if a train needs to come through and utilize those siding tracks, we have to move out of the way, let them pass. Then we have within that area a 48-hour window where we will have to cover those tracks and we'll have to walk the crane out and we'll sit out there and we have 48 hours to then lift, get the bridge ready, get it in position, and then across the main line tracks, we have 4 hours that we can say no trains can come through, and that's it. That's the 4-hour window that we have to actually place the bridge on the 2 towers across the main line, and then we'll have some hours left in our 48-hour window to work on bolting it and getting the crane out of the way and then removing all of the materials that we had placed on those sidings. And that's the way that works. And if we don't do it within that time frame, we're subject to penalties of, I forget what they were, $25,000 an hour, no, a day, hour, right? Yeah. So needless to say, we want to move quickly. So that was the important part. There's a whole lot other parts of the agreement, the flagging costs, the permanent, what we're also entering into is the permanent aerial easement. across there, and then these are the temporary license areas or temporary construction easements, as they refer to. We've been through it many times. We've been through it with our construction management firm. We've done a constructability analysis. We've looked at the timing. We've pre-qualified contractors, so we have people that have built bridges before. And would we like more time? Absolutely. But do we think we can do it within this window? Yes, we think we can. And that's, take any questions on that if you'd like, or we can talk a little bit more about the bridge and show you some pictures. The scope is the bridge, as we talked about, also building Horton Landing Park, as well as we put it here because it's another capital project, the Horton Landing Park expansion. And I mention that because there's a little bit of work that we need to do to the plans and specifications to make sure that we're linking properly with the Greenway to Sherwin-Williams. But we'll be able to build this. There's the aerial view of the bridge. You can see the ramps coming up. You can see the Temescal Creek culvert. And you can see the old railroad spur would be to the right side. And there's a little piece of parcel there, and that bridge is what was called the sliver parcel, and the parcel that we did purchase from the railroad. And part of what took a long time is we had to negotiate and get that purchase in place before the railroad would really entertain a serious conversation with us about the rest of the agreements that we needed with them. This is a picture looking down the tracks. Another picture. This is kind of difficult. It's one of the best images we could get to show the entire thing. But what this shows is you see the crossing of the creek. You see the Greenway as it moves up all the way from Horton Street past our corporation yard, behind Griffles and the Novartis buildings, and then over the Temescal Creek, and then from there the bridge would go over the tracks, and then we have the connection on down to Horton Street. The completed steps, there are many more than this, but the key ones that relate to this agreement, we have our CPUC permits been issued. We've acquired the easements from Bay Street, from Novartis, Griffles. We're updating the plans and specifications with some minor revisions, but we plan to be able to bid the project by the end of the month if approved. And that will be the next steps, is to approve this agreement with the railroad and then solicit bids from our list of pre-qualified contractors. And if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
All right. Any clarifying questions? Okay.
I have just one. So the timeline for the construction of it, our ability to access it, are we using the space where the Horton Landing connection goes to Horton and 53rd Street? Yeah, they use that map. That would be.
Which one do you want? This one?
You can use that. So where Horton and 53rd are, there's the little space we have just south of the single-story gray building, the old Bear building that's there. Is that how we're going to move all our equipment, or does Lennar giving us the right to move? So we have to use it through that space only. Mm-hmm. Okay, that was my only question.
We could also come down the Greenway, from by the corporation yard off of Horton
by
there.
The garage.
Yes.
Okay.
Great. All right. If there's no more clarifying questions, is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, do we have any discussion or emotion? Yes.
I just want to, this past year, staff and Andrew and Michael in particular, I just want to thank you for all the time. I don't think we had a single meeting this past year where I didn't ask what's the status of the bridge. And so I just really want to thank you, because it was a lot of work, and most people at home won't have any idea how much time was put into pricing a sliver parcel, and the nonsense that goes into that negotiation, or how much a flagger costs and how that gets negotiated, or what it's like to negotiate over 4 hours of line closure to literally install a large, massive piece of permanent infrastructure at one time. And the agreements that, a lot of people said this is taking forever, what's going on? Well, if you saw the agreements that our legal counsel and our public works staff had to navigate with recalcitrant land barons who wear top hats and monocles and work in Omaha, I mean, honestly, thank you so much for and you're laughing because you know I'm right, but thank you so much for your work on this. You know, it's a long project in the making, but I'm super excited to vote on this tonight.
I think when I ran for office in 2016, I found an article online about this bridge in 2010 that said, we're getting the bridge built this year. So obviously Emeryville's been waiting for a while for this, and you've really had the drive, the public works and legal staff, to make this happen. And I'm so happy it's happening. I think we all are.
Yeah, I'd like to third those sentiments and big thank you to staff. And I think it's true that folks in the public don't necessarily know how slowly it is to work with a railroad, but we know now. So thank you for all of your hard work. This is very exciting.
Do we have a motion?
I'd like to make a motion to approve Resolution 12.1.1.
All right, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Fantastic. We had a motion by Member Bowders. We've got a second by Member Donahue.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. Do we have a motion for item 12.1.2?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All right, we've got a motion by Member Martinez and a second by Vice Mayor Pats.
Councilmember Bowders?
Aye.
Councilmember Donahue?
Aye.
Councilmember Martinez?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Pats?
Aye.
And Mayor Medina.
Aye. All right. 12.2, request for qualifications and proposals for the design and development of an affordable housing project at 4300 San Pablo Avenue.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. I'm Catherine Frippo, Housing Coordinator with the City of Emeryville. On May 18, 2017, the City Council adopted Resolution 1751, designated 4300 San Pablo as an affordable senior housing site, and authorized the staff to issue an RFQ for that site. That RFQ was issued, and during the mandatory meeting, we discovered that there was a problem with the funding because the Housing Authority wasn't going to be able to make the project entirely project-based Section 8, which meant that the project was infeasible with the number of units it had. We took some suggestions to upzone that area, and that took a little bit, but we were at that point. In October, we amended the general plan to make it possible to have more units at that site. Staff is prepared to issue the RFQ with the new densities. However, at your December 10th meeting, City Council directed staff to schedule future agenda items to reconsider the project as a senior housing project into a multi-generational housing project. So staff is looking for direction from you on whether to issue the RFP as it is or to alter it to make it a multi-generational housing project on that site.
Okay. Thank you. Does that conclude the staff report? Yep. All right, any clarifying questions?
I have one.
Yes.
Is there a very specific definition of multi-generational housing complex?
No, and no, not per se. We would define it in the RFQ.
Madam Mayor?
Yes, please.
If I could just, this item was requested by Councilmember Bowders to be referred for this agenda, and I think he was the one who articulated that term for purposes of the referral. So for us, it would be helpful to have the council maybe discuss what the council's interest is in that terminology to give us some guidance if you do direct us to move forward in that way for the next RFP, it would be helpful to get some direction from the council about how you would look at that terminology.
Okay. Do you have any presentation on, or do you just want us to move on?
We could take public comment and then discuss it.
All right. Any public comment on this item? Thank you. All right. Discussion. I think it would be best to start with you then.
Yeah, so I want to thank my colleagues and staff for agreeing to revisit this. I know we had to once due to financial reasons, and we were about to put this back out. couple things that I just wanted to invite us to think about in asking for this reconsideration of the scope for the RFQP. We just recently upzoned this portion of San Pablo Avenue, which allows for greater height and density, so there could be more units than we originally proposed when we contemplated this project the first time around. The second thing that has been kind of tearing at me about this site from the beginning is it's located directly across the street from the Emeryville Center of Community Life. It is next door to Emeryville, which is an existing senior housing site, and it is so it's across the street and down a block from the ECCL. Don't worry, I got your geography for you. I know.
It's across the street from Arizmendi.
I saw Councilmember Pat's going, wait a second.
Your geography is way off.
It's a block.
It's a couple blocks.
Okay. It's 47th. It's 2 blocks. So the senior center is just to the south of it. And my point in raising this is that there are a couple places in the United States where affordable housing has been built that's intergenerational housing. You can call it multi-generational housing, I suppose, too. And one of the benefits of intergenerational housing and not a senior-only site is there are social and health benefits both to young people who are unaccompanied, young adults, and to older people by cohabitating in shared spaces and having programming that's designed to facilitate that kind of shared environment. So younger people, and I'm thinking in particular when I think about this compliant with fair housing law, of course, is something that has the scope of emancipated youth, aged out foster youth, or what used to be aged out foster youth since we extended the age of foster care eligibility, and formerly homeless youth. So there are a lot of young people who do not have housing, who would benefit greatly from having an opportunity to live so close to the ECCL, to a community center, transportation corridor, and just all the services the city has. At the same time, there are a lot of who benefit also socially from having adult figures in their lives who provide mentorship, who have life experience, who are there to be supportive of them. And conversely, there's a lot of social and scientific data that shows that seniors who often move into places where other seniors live can feel more isolated, can have poorer life trajectories, and they often want to give something back and feel valuable. And so having young people who are almost like pseudo-grandchildren to them, or people who they can relate to, stay mentally engaged with, there's just so many social benefits. And there's been a couple of these projects have been done in New York. I believe there's one in either Kansas City or Chicago as well. And I just would like to ask that the council consider giving direction this evening to ask staff to refer this to the Housing Committee and the Commission on Aging. And if there are other committees people think are appropriate, that's fine. But to delay issuing this a little further to allow for consideration of how we can really lead. We're such good leaders on affordable housing to begin with, and we really have the opportunity to do something, I think, really positive for people here with the expanded scope of the density and height here, and just the location of this project is really optimal, and there's such a need for foster and homeless youth in this county. I just couldn't pass up the chance to ask. That's my ask.
Okay. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll let Member Martinez go first.
Well, I'm supportive of this request in concept. I do worry about affordable housing developers' ability to get financing for projects that are untested in this market. So obviously I do support it going through the Housing Committee and the Commission on Aging, but when this comes back, I may want to reserve the ability to, perhaps prefer multi-generational housing, but also allow for more traditional affordable housing.
I'll go ahead and comment. I do really like the idea of always pushing us to go for the best concept, the best thing that we can do for our community and find the area of greatest need. I'm, supportive of the concept. I know you mentioned a couple of sites in the country. I don't know them specifically, and I don't know if it would, tend to cost more for this sort of thing to be run. I'm assuming the city would not be running it. But my suggestion might be, if you're amenable to it, to have the Housing Committee and Commission on Aging, or when we bring it back to us, allow the RFQP or RFP to encompass both, so we can get both bids and compare and see if it's feasible, and don't box us out of one cycle of getting RFPs, if in case it's not feasible.
I understand. I'm fine with that.
Okay. Any other?
I'm going to comment, even though I think Member Bowders and Member Martinez, I was going to say the same. I agree with both of them, and then add what you added. So I'm feeling like not much to add other than I always prefer heterogeneous projects. I don't like to put all people in one spot. I think the research shows us that doesn't work, and that leads to problems. And so the idea that we can have mixed use and multi-generational is just incredible. And it's a little early in the year, but in about February, for the last, 15 years of my life, I've been dealing with foster kids who've aged out and where are they going to live once high school's over. And the thought that we can do anything, even if we only create one unit, that's more than there is out there now. And I was talking at HACA, the Housing Authorities. I don't know how much we've involved them, but I know that at some point they'd be very excited to see new multi-use housing go in, because they can help with the financing piece a little bit, not very much. But so I just want to echo exactly what the three of you said. I think we have to take this chance. I think we have to look out there, and I think we also have to cover ourselves by doing the RFQ, asking for both based on what we can find. I'm hoping we find a way to do it as mixed use, but I understand that we got to get it done either way. So, thank you.
Comments?
Yeah, I like the idea a lot. And I like the approach of having more traditional RFQ and your idea, and looking at both. And I'm all ears to it.
Can I just invite Catherine to respond to the financial component of it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of financial issues. One, every time you take longer to do something, it costs more. As we sort of found with Estrella Vista, the more times it takes you to gather the funding, then the more the construction costs will be. The other issue on funding is, as mentioned by Councilmember Martinez, it's a slightly unconventional product for investors. And so I think the project in Portland, the 15-unit project in Portland, has a tax credits. But I imagine that the tax credit investors will be more conservative, so we'll probably won't get as much in our tax credit syndication. So, it means probably that the city will have to put in more funding, but that's, the proposal to look at them side by side will give you a better idea what the costs might be.
Can I clarify with you? So if we send this, as you were suggesting, to the Commission on Aging and the Housing Committee, what's the earliest this could then come back? Like, exactly how much time are we talking about this costing us here? Like 2 months?
Before it comes back to council, more than 2,
April or May, probably.
Think. Right, so we have to get an RFP, draft an RFP. The other thing is, I think we'll need to have, for the RFQ part, we'll need to have more time for the developers to put together their proposal. So it's not just when it comes back here, but then the RFQ will take longer, because
Pro forma will be longer.
Just putting it together and the developers thinking through the physical aspect of the site. Mm-hmm. Because the other projects that have been done, multi-generations, are lower density, 2 stories often with their own, and each unit has their own entrance. And this is conceived as a double loaded corridor sort of situation. So, they're going to have to think through the design aspect as well as the financing aspect. So we want to give them enough time to really think through it and bring us the best project.
Okay, so is it a matter of months or like an extra year of how much longer this would take?
So, Madam Mayor, if I could just jump in, in addition to the additional analysis that Catherine identified, I think we're going to want to also look at the fair housing law aspect of if you have an age-restricted community, 62 and above, there are some rules that apply, and once you introduce people who are less than 62 living in that same development, what does that mean for the fair housing implications? I'm not sure we have had the opportunity to fully analyze that yet, so that may take a little bit of time too. So I don't really see this coming back to the council maybe before the end of the fiscal year, but certainly not before that.
Okay.
June.
Okay, so probably June at the earliest.
At the
latest.
So
earliest.
we would, and remember that this RFQ process is a two-stage process, which is unusual, but we're trying a new system where you do the RFQ first, then we shortlist, so that, you know, has to go to the housing committee and come back to council. Then with the shortlist, they would then go further with their financing. So it's, you know, before the project we have a developer will be certainly, I would think, a year.
Right. Okay. One final question. You know, we've been talking about this might cost us a bit of extra money. It seems to me that Emeryville has been pretty good at creating like innovative projects that have been able to attract funding, and in particular, Member Bowders is really good at finding money for stuff. Is there a pot of money you might have your eye on that would go to such an innovative project?
Well, yeah, there's a lot of things, I think, but I think, you know, there's a lot of promise right now. There's nothing guaranteed, but there's a lot of promise that the state of California is going to really look to innovate in the budget this year around housing, and that doesn't promise anything to this particular concept, but I think there will likely be an expansion of the low-income housing tax credit this year, and so there'll be more tax credit dollars available, and I think the goal is right now across the new administration to find ways to house people who are traditionally disadvantaged at finding housing, and so I see this as an opportunity to be on the front end of doing something socially beneficial that will also perhaps be incentivized in future iterations of how tax credits are awarded. Would you agree that's possible?
Yes, I think the issue here is the income levels of both seniors and TAY tend to be very low or extremely low, which means that projects need a lot of subsidy, ongoing subsidy for the period of affordability, and the way that usually happens is through some sort of tenant-based rental assistance.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we would hope for, I think, in this project is some sort of tenant-based rental assistance that is associated with the transition age youth, which I think there's some interest in.
Okay.
But it doesn't exist yet.
All right. All right. I think we have talked about, generally everyone's been positive about the direction of putting this to those two committees, and then coming back with a mixed RFPQ or RFP. Is that enough direction for you at this time?
I think so, yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, 12.3, consideration of amendments to Chapter 28 and Title 5 of the Emeryville Municipal Code, Cannabis.
Thank you, Mayor. This item is put on at the request of Member Bowders. He had requested that the council consider modifications to Section 5-28.10 of the Municipal Code. So staff has put this on for council's discussion and direction.
I have a 1-minute presentation.
Okay, I'd like to get a 1-minute presentation from Member Bowders.
The proposal is simply that we have a section in the code and asking council to give staff direction tonight to come back with a red line of our existing ordinance that would make changes to make sure that our local regulations are consistent with state law on the subject and not deprive our local dispensaries of the ability to display merchandise as viewable from a public right-of-way, which is allowed under state law but is not allowed under our ordinance.
Okay. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Nasser Azimi with East Bay Therapeutics. We support the modification because I think in the context of marketing a high-end operation, it's quite a good idea to showcase to the public, not in a sense of exposing the products contrary to any particular community pushback, but just to show that the facility caters to a wide range of services that the community demands. I think it's important to do that. All too many dispensaries are, they got boarded up glasses and such, sort of invisible in terms of exposing their operational capacity. So we see a lot of goodness in showcasing, the type of operation that is credible and caters to the needs of the community. And this modification would definitely accomplish that. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, any discussion on this item? What? Member Martinez.
I just want to thank Member Bowders for bringing this forward. I think, we're coming out of a period where the stigma on cannabis is being lifted, and I think bringing these businesses into the daylight, I'm looking at, I can see the AMC sign from here, and there's no stigma against, what they're selling, movies. We should be able to take a look at what the actual product is, and at these businesses that we've invited into our city. So thank you for bringing this forward.
I like the analogy. Thank you for mentioning it.
Oh, I never knew I could see the AMC sign from here.
Yeah, but I believe you. All right, is that enough? I am supportive of this. Everyone?
Yep. Yeah.
All right, adequate direction?
You feel you have direction?
Yeah. So I'm hearing at least three members of the council.
Yes. All of us are in support
all
of this.
5 members. Thank you.
Okay. 13, department head reports. No? Charlie? Nothing?
Aye.
Wow. Andrew? Pedro? Quiet night over there. Future agenda item requests from council members. Yes, Member Martinez.
I have one. I'm interested in bringing back for review our development bonus system to make sure that the items that we have on there are in line with our priorities. So I know that Member Bowders had brought forward the unit mix, and that we're going to be taking a look at that, but I'd like to look at the overall development bonus system as a whole.
Okay, I'm supportive of that. Is everyone else?
Yeah.
Great.
Be interested in that.
That on?
Can I ask a question as to whether this, I guess it wouldn't be included in her thing. Because I agree, I support this thing. Parking minimums are not included in the bonus system, technically correct in any way?
No, that's right.
Don't give any bonuses related to parking minimums. So this would be, that would be outside the scope of this.
Correct.
You could bring that up separately.
I would like to separately ask that we review the issue of parking minimums.
I support that.
More like parking
maximums.
We currently have both.
Yes.
Minimums and maximums.
But we're going to discuss that.
The minimum is the only thing I'm looking to discuss is whether or not we should eliminate specifically parking minimums for new development, residential.
I concur that we should put that on the agenda.
Okay.
Everyone good with that?
I agree.
Yeah.
All right, I would like to agendize, prior to when we began talking about the budget, probably in March, a study session on parks and where Emeryville is at in terms of filling our general plan with parks and looking for opportunities.
Sure.
Cool?
Yeah.
Park study session, coming at you when convenient. Any other items? All right, 3's good for now.
So, Madam Mayor, if you'd give us the liberty to sort of look at the upcoming agendas and schedule these items, give staff time to do the necessary research, and we'll come to you with a proposed schedule for those.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Great. If nothing else, then we adjourn this meeting at 8:54.